All right.
Okay, so my name is Jenny Hart. I'm a librarian at the University of Chicago, and I'm going to talk about some sessions I've held in collaborations with our special collections and archives for the Physics Club and the Math Club. So first, a little introduction. So I am the computer science, mathematics, statistics, and physics librarian at the university. So I handle all, I'm the liaison for those departments and I handle all the collection development for them. We have undergraduate majors for all of these disciplines, as well as master's and PhD programs. And I also manage our math library, which is a separate library in the mathematics department. So a little history of the program. So I started offering these events with special collections about 8 years ago, early in my time here at the university. At the time, I was a science librarian with physics liaison responsibilities only. So Special Collections had hosted the Math Club and showed them some materials, and I'm not sure how that came about, but I saw a notice about it on their blog and asked them if they would be interested in doing something similar for the Physics Club also. So we put together a list of titles, a variety of materials of both Special Collections and archival material. I'll talk about in detail later. And I included suggestions from the Special Collections librarian I worked with and ideas I had. And then when I took over responsibility for math a few years later, I asked the math club if they would be interested in coming and having their own session, and they were. So we did a separate event for them and developed a list of pieces for that. And those also included rare math materials, some manuscripts, and material from our archives. And so the purpose of all of this was I was looking for a way to reach undergraduates in these disciplines. I liaison for, and this was a way to reach them, to meet them and get to know them, at least some of them. Um, where I work, it's a large research university. It tends to be dominated by faculty and grad students and other researchers. Um, Grad students make up about 2/3 of our students, so I had a lot of trouble reaching undergraduates in my disciplines. I don't do very much library instruction in math or physics for undergraduates. They don't ask me for help a lot. They don't do a lot of research projects in general. Um, so it was the clubs in these two disciplines are composed exclusively of undergraduates, and this was a way to meet some of them and get to know them. Uh, so Um, so scheduling the event. So I usually contact the club sometime in the spring. We hold the event near the end of the spring quarter um, every year. So for us, this is in late May. We do it this way because special collections is very busy throughout the year in the fall, winter, and a lot of the spring, but they have some time at the end of the year. Uh, and so they have the time to host an event like this. And the clubs are also very busy during these times. The members are busy with their work and also with club activities, and but that's all winding down at this point in the spring. And they're looking for events to do at this point and have been more receptive when I've offered it to them at this time of year, I've found. So what I do is I just contact the head of each club. So I'm on the email list for these clubs. It's easy enough to keep up with, keep track of who's the head of the club at any time. I work out a date and time with them, working with the head of research and instruction and special collections. And then we have a working list of titles at this point for both clubs to show them and as examples of what we can offer. We ask for their input. Uh, if they have any input about what they would like to see, if there are any particular, in general, particular scientists, mathematicians that they're interested in seeing their work if we have it. We used to show about 15 pieces in all. We've reduced it in time to about 10 for each club because special collections is it's busier and busier every year and has less time to pull pieces. So they asked to limit it. Okay. So how I handle it is I usually special collections is inside the library. It's kind of a longish walk from the entrance to the library. So what I usually do is I meet them at the entrance before we go in, just so partly just so I can collect them all, make sure they all, got know where they're going. But also it gives me a chance to introduce myself and talk to them a bit. So I get to know a little bit of what kind of work they do. I ask them, questions about how they use the library, including the math library, and try to ask questions that give me a chance to hear about what kinds of projects they work on in math or physics, if they're doing any kind of research for a thesis, and how they use the library for that. So if they use any of our collections for the work they're doing. And also they're just their general experience and opinions of using the library. So then I take them into special collections. I used to give them a presentation in special collections, usually just like 5 or 8 minutes. I'd show them our research guides for their discipline and talk about a bit about what services I can offer them, but I found that was a bit awkward. Uh, they were more interested in looking at the material at that point. It was all laid out on the table, and they weren't really interested in listening to this pitch. So I found it better to talk to them ahead of time when I had their sort of undivided attention and then bring them into special collections. And also some of the special collections rooms did not have a screen where I could show anything of our website or online guide, so there was less an advantage to presenting something in the room. So the session we offer is usually about 45 minutes to an hour. It's in kind of a, we lay out the books in sort of like a show and tell format, um, with most of the time devoted to them looking at the pieces on their own. So the special collections librarian usually gives an introduction to the material. So she's in the room with me. She talks about how the books were made, which is of a lot of interest to them. She points out images and diagrams and talks about how they were drawn or pressed, what kind of material the books were made of, and or other materials. And then we give students a lot of time to look at them. So they really enjoy that, looking at them and talking to each other about them. They like to take pictures and discuss it with each other, the different materials. Most of them stay for the whole time. And so this is an example of something we show. This is James Franck's Nobel Prize, which we have in our special collections. So we showed this to the physics department. He was a physicist last May. Okay. So the pieces, as I said, we show about 10 items. It's a mix of some rare books we have, manuscripts and other kinds of special collections material, and then some archive materials that we have. So for math, the books include early editions of Euler, Descartes, an early pressing of Euclid's Elements after the printing press was invented. And from our archives, we have some meeting records from the math club dating back to its beginning in the 1890s when the university was founded. So they really enjoy seeing those. They're all handwritten. This image is of some of the notes from the math club. And for physics, we have some rare books for physics too. We put out Kelvin's Natural Philosophy, Faraday, Newton's Principia, and then from our archives we have a few different things. We have some of James Franck's papers. We have some notebooks from that were Enrico Fermi's when he was here at the university. So, and then like I was showing the Nobel Prize, so we put some of those things out too from the archives. Um, so, um, So I don't do any formal assessment of these sessions, but I have gotten some feedback from participants in different forms. So I received research requests from students who met me at the event. I've had students come into the math library and talk to me who met me at the event and ask me for help with research or finding different materials. I've also received some book requests for book purchase requests from students who participated in these events, requests to add to our collection. And I've also been able to get to know the math club heads and ask them to promote some of our library outreach events, and they've been really receptive to that. So they've promoted them to their list. We have a write-in for thesis writers, people in their junior and senior year who are writing a thesis um, for their major. And also we have a science writing prize, so to promote that, to have people submit science writing that they've done um, to the contest. So, and then generally talking to them, I've learned a little bit about what their needs are, understood better how the thesis process works in both physics and math for those who do it, and what kinds of materials they use in the library, how they use the library, and any issues they have with getting what they need from the library. And then in the future, so as I mentioned, all the materials we use, I most of what we show now is European mathematicians and physicists' work. That's what we have in our special collections. Most of our rare books and other manuscripts and other materials are from there. So in the future, I'm hoping to bring in more material from other parts of the world. In particular, at our university, we have a strong East Asian and South Asian, East Asia collection and South Asia collections, and but their materials are housed separately in the library, and their rare materials, particularly in East Asia's, are not in special collections. They have their own treasure room of rare materials, and I've tried in the past years to include materials from their collections. We haven't yet been able to work that out, but I'm hoping to do so in the future. Um, and then I've also tried for a few years to expand the format to try to use this sort of format, which it seems very popular. People like to, they both clubs are very receptive to coming to special collections and look at this rare materials. So try to expand it to other places um, where there might be interest as a way to reach other programs in my discipline. So this winter, we're going to bring in a class in one of our continuing education programs that's run through the math department. So it's a program for junior high teachers who are taking on math um, teaching in their job, and the program is to help improve their knowledge of the discipline as a whole. So they offer these evening classes to them, and they do a section on the history of mathematics. So I saw this, and I contacted the professor, and he was very excited to take them to special collections and show them some of the material that he was going to be talking about in this class. So this was a way to get a connection with that program and faculty that I otherwise, would not have been so easy to um, reach. So we have a session scheduled in February that they're going to come to special collections for that. So that is all I have. Um, if anyone has any questions, let me know. Happy to take them.
Well, thank you very much, Jenny, for such an interesting presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Uh, as I was listening, it sounds really interesting, and the obvious advantage is that your special collections have such rich um, collection of historical materials and very important ones. Um, And that is really wonderful. I wish every school would have such wonderful collection. But can you tell me how many students participate in the clubs, like physics club and mathematics club, altogether?
It sort of varies. They said their events usually they have events, and it's not like such a formal membership, but they usually say they have about 15 to 20 people that come to any event they have. So they often do presentations to each other about different math or physics topics. And then for the special collections event, it varies anywhere between like 6 or 7 and yeah, 15 or 18 students who come to that particular to this showing. So. That's the kind of that's about the numbers.
Yeah, well, it's not bad. It's hard to get math or physics students to come, any students to come to events. We trying to do a lot of events here at U Albany, and it really is hard. I'm sure a lot of people can commiserate with me. I was wondering if the faculty come to the visit.
No, it's totally it's just students. It's just undergraduates. So the head of the club is an undergraduate themselves, and it's just their fellow students. So this one,
Okay.
although this one I'm working on for this class in February, that is there'll be a faculty member there, but not for the clubs.
Oh, okay. That is the one that is bringing the math teachers, right?
Yeah, math teachers. So it's a
Yeah.
continuing ed program.
It really is actually it's a great idea to reach out to continuing education. Here is a question from Kristen. Have you seen any evidence of students using special collections materials in coursework after being introduced to the archives?
Um, I haven't, no. I so I don't really, we have a history of science program. It's not really a department, it's just a program at the university, but I'm not the liaison to that department. So I don't really handle much else to do with the history of science besides these showings and special collections. So it would, I, you know, that may go on and I don't know about it, but I haven't heard of anything.
Okay, thank you. History of science sounds really interesting. And who runs this program?
Um, so history of science, there's a it's a program with professors from different departments.
Okay.
Um, a lot of it is focused on history of it's not so much focused on the physical sciences, although there are some classes on like the history of statistics and a few different. Um, but there that again, there's a another librarian who's the liaison to that to those programs, and I know that they've like the history of medicine. There's a class in the history of medicine that they have shown, have done something similar in special collections, shown off materials for them. And maybe, I think there's another one in the history of science, but it's something in the biological sciences. So I know this is done with classes in science, not just clubs, that they do some work in special collections, but it's not in my areas, so I'm not involved.
Okay. It sounds like this history of science is something like a general science literacy sort of program, wouldn't you say?
Um, the history of science, you can, I mean, there's an undergraduate major. I don't know if they have graduate programs, but yeah, I mean, it's in collaboration with the history, and there are, it's more hi historians involved in it. Um, there are less people, less professors from the actual science departments.
Oh, so it's not like
But
physics for
yeah.
poets.
No, it's not like that. It's really like a history of, you know, the study of science or a study of the history of science. So like other areas of history. So, but they definitely, I know they have used special collections too. So, um, yeah, for those kinds of programs, it would be great. They're doing research in those areas, and yeah, special collections would be great. And I know, I mentioned like we have all these collections, um, and we're a big research university, and we have a large special collections. But I mean, the students are just as interested in the archives, the archival material, the math club, and things like that. Sort of the history of their, you know, departments in the university as they are in, some of the rare books and whatever that we have, that maybe not, every university has. But, and they also really like, I mean, the rare books, they're very interested in just like the way they're made, all these like very elaborate diagrams they have, and the way, those are drawn, as I mentioned, like those things interest them. I mean, some of the books are made of like the binding is, or the tops are made of wood. like they're bound in like this wood. Anyway, they love that. Like they're really interested in the materials too. So it's not like you have to have some, like that is just as exciting to them as, that it's, you know, Newton or whatever that they're looking at. So,
We had similar programs with our special collections, but they're not science related. They just, demonstrated some rare pieces from 15th century, 16th century Europe. Again, some with those wooden boards, as you mentioned. And
yeah.
that really gets students excited because it's something that really completely out of our world, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's very different. So, and even the paper, that it's a very different kind of paper than they're used to, and all the stone binding and the way it's
Right.
made is very different. So they find all of that stuff really interesting. Um,
Yeah, I see a
yeah,
couple of people are typing, and while we're waiting for their questions, I just wanted to mention I teach information literacy in mathematics and statistics at the university, and it's one credit course, Gen Ed for math department. And my
mhm.
students often research history of math, and the things they uncover are really really remarkable. I'm learning with them as I go along. So yeah, history of math is great. Okay, have you, here is a question from Brian Simboli. Brian, I hope I pronounced your name right. We've done a lot of sessions here at Lehigh in history of astronomy, plus 2 sessions on history of electromagnetism and statistical physics and thermodynamics. A lot of fun to do, but a lot of prep too. We have library guides if anyone is interested. I really believe strongly in inculcating an interest in history of science among science students. I concur.
Yeah, yeah. Um, are those part of a class that's being taught in those disciplines?
Okay, Brian is typing his answer.
Sorry, it's hard to ask him.
No, looks like he and Kristen are typing. We encourage everyone to ask questions from our speaker. We have a good attendance today. Um, For example, my class that I just finished teaching last Monday, last class, one of the students was researching Katherine Johnson. She was African American mathematician who worked with NASA in the early 50s, and she contributed quite a bit to the space development program, and I myself had no idea, and that was really interesting to learn. My colleagues and I here at Science, we had sort of an idea of collecting, making sort of exhibit for on the topic of, for example, women overlooked for Nobel honors. It came up from one ACS meeting once, and I actually have a magazine with me, and this is something that we probably should do because it sounds really interesting. The more we know, the better we become. Okay, and here's the question from Kristen. What type of materials you hoping to include from the East-South Asia collections in the future?
I have a few in a list, and it's not immediately accessible to me, but it's just, I mean, and I haven't even been able with them to like set up a meeting to consult with them about what they have. So I'm hoping to do that. So I don't um, have any particular, names, but whatever materials they have, I know they have some in early math at least. So I was hoping to include that. And then Brian, oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. So it's a class in astrophysics that comes by. Huh. That's nice that the professor's interested in a historical perspective. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I think such courses, they really should be taught in every subject because it brings a lot of perspective, broadens view of students. And it seems like we are talking today a lot about history of science. Are any other participants, do they have any similar experiences or similar events or programs at their respective institutions? That would be interesting to hear. Um, History of science seems to me so important, especially that we are faced with advances in new sciences, new science advances every day. So, Jennifer, I also had a question. You are dealing with several programs, right? Several science programs on campus. I see computer science and mathematics and statistics and physics. Um, how do you interact with your faculty?
Um, with faculty, so it really varies a lot by department. The math and statistics department, as I mentioned in the, we have a math departmental library, um, and they both, those two departments both use the library a fair amount. Um, and so a lot of it is talking to them, or I've attended some of their events. I mean, I've done that for all my departments, but they're right there. So they often come into the library and ask me questions and that kind of thing. With physics and computer science, it's a bit harder. For all of the disciplines, I do orientation events at the beginning of the year for graduate students. So I interact some with the faculty who are involved with those. And then, of course, the graduate students. But yeah, it's mostly just, them speaking to me individually, or sometimes with the physics, I hear from a lot less, and also computer science, but asking me questions, looking for certain materials, or in computer science, it's a lot of different kinds of manuals, or, on different kinds of computer languages, that kind of thing that they're looking for. So that's how I generally interact with them.
Right. They sound to be the most they look like they are the most difficult category of um, professors. Our computer sciences are really hard to reach on our campus for sure. And here's a question from Jane Fail. My chemistry and physics instructors want information literacy, but I have no idea how I can provide info lit if they don't write papers. Recommendations, please. Okay, I see Jennifer Lee is typing. Um, I personally, I am not liaison to any of the science departments. My subject is Russian and Slavic studies, and it's a very small department with minor only now, reduced to minor. But I do teach information literacy in mathematics and statistics, and I work in science library at the University at Albany. And I know that our science liaisons, Sue and Mike, well, Mike just retired, they get invited to do initial presentations, and it's mostly for graduate programs, but not for undergrads. It's really, really hard. Sending this mass email probably helps at the beginning of the semester, but okay, here are some recommendations for Jane Fail from Jennifer Lee and from John Meyer. John, are you in Penn State? I think we conversed before in our chats. Nice to talk to you again. So Jennifer Lee suggests try resources that would be useful for their labs. And John says, I liaison with math and I shifted the conversation helping their students evaluate web sources, aka Wikipedia in math. That sounds really interesting. And now we do not say Wikipedia is bad anymore, right? As a librarians. Um, Especially, I always sort of knew that, sort of heard that Wikipedia sources for sciences were more or less okay, um, as opposed to humanities and social sciences, but apparently quality is increased. So it seems like it's a good idea to work with sources like that, will help students evaluate sources in Wikipedia in science-related subjects. Oh, I see a lot of tips and tricks for Jan Fail. Some good ideas. I always try to promote our SciFinder, the premium chemistry database. It's interesting questions that Lori Neuerberg pointed out about women scientists at the Wikipedia. We in our library last spring, we did a Wikipedia editathon, but it was art and feminism. So we were editing and improving articles about Wikipedia articles, Wikipedia entries on women artists. And it was a very interesting undertaking which Information Literacy Department undertook in the libraries with art department together. We had a reasonably good crowd of people who came to help us to edit Wikipedia articles, but I did not know about women scientists. Thank you, Lori.
Yeah, we've done
It's
an
this,
edited.
you've done that,
Oh, I was just saying
Jenny?
we've done one too. Yeah, in our special collections. Yeah, I think they were. It wasn't related to scientists, but yes, I think it was local Chicago history, if I'm remembering. But yeah, those are nice events.
Yeah, I remember I actually edited this article on Judy Chicago.
Oh,
I've happened to find an article in the fresh issue of, now I'm forgetting what magazine, and I just added the quote and I, put a proper citation, everything. So that was, I felt myself very proud. Free resources we subscribe to EBSCOhost inspection. Inspect. We do have inspect, so. Oh, that came from Nature. The article on Wikipedia, science, women scientists came from Nature. Jane, I can send you our links that we used when we did the Wikipedia editathon for our program, Art Plus Feminism. I have to look them up, but I'll make myself a note to send you email. All right, we have Lori typing. Oh, here is a, thank you so much, Lori. That is a great link. I'm sure a lot of people will copy it because it's a very, very useful link. Thank you again. Well, anybody else has questions to Jenny? Hello? Does anybody have questions to Jenny, dear audience? Well, Jenny, can you sort of give us last minute advice?
Um, well, I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways, different maybe ways to use special collections material, like history of science material in to reach science departments as people have shown. So the clubs are one way of doing it, or if there's another way of you can get, a history of science angle in. And I think the just looking at the rare materials and the viewing is really attractive, and it's just a good way to get your foot in the door with some of the science departments when it can be really hard otherwise.
I was just thinking, one of my students' team, actually in my in-person class, I do team-based learning, they were researching Euclid, and a lot of his materials, you could find them printed, free online because some of the books were published, sort of reprinted in 19th century, like Euclid's Elements, and you could see it in this funny font, but it's completely readable. I think it came from British Library, I believe. I don't remember exactly, but it's available online. And I was thinking, would it be interesting to sort of look for some of these materials and maybe make like an electronic presentation of sorts, because that could be also interesting because it looks like really old, but it's available online and everybody can read it. I started reading these Euclid Elements myself and I saw, well, let's see how my students evaluated that source. It was very interesting. Science outreach is the most difficult. These folks are the most hard to reach out, and I'm sure everybody will agree with me. And I'm always myself and a science outreach person in a science library look for different various various things to do, various events, various I don't know, innovations to improve our outreach to science departments, and it seems very interesting that we are all sharing it, and special collections can be a very great help, especially ones like yours, Jenny. Um, well, do we have questions to Jenny? Any last minute questions? It's 2:51 p.m. Eastern Time. I think it's 1:51 p.m. Central Time, and if I see people already started writing us thank yous, we will thank Jenny a lot. Thank you very much, Jenny, for a very interesting presentation, and I think we had a good discussion about reaching out to science departments, and some people have inspirations, and it's really great, and I hope everybody has a nice day and the rest of the semesters. And I'm looking forward to our future chats. Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, Jenny. Hi,
Bye.
Eloise. Eloise?